Welcome to the Gitaly Group 13.2 Kickoff call. My name is James Ramsey and I am the Group Product Manager for the Create stage of the DevOps lifecycle here at GitLab and Interim Product Manager for the Gitaly Group. In the 13.2 release, we're continuing some really exciting work that we've been doing on a feature called Gitaly Cluster. Gitaly Cluster allows you to store multiple copies of the underlying repository data on multiple servers. And this is really useful for improving the fault tolerance of your Git repository storage. So this is particularly relevant for large GitLab instances that have a real need to be always up, even if a single server was to fail, and makes possible high availability configurations. We released the very first version of Gitaly Cluster in 13.0, and it's a first version, so there's lots of work improving it that we're doing. And so the primary items that I'd like to share with you that we're going to be working on in the coming release, 13.2, is continuing to focus on the reliability of Gitaly Cluster. We've observed some situations where replication can fail, and then the queue backs up for replication jobs, and it would prevent the replicas from catching up. And so we've observed replication failing in our tests on gitlab.com. So we're looking to resolve and continue to improve the reliability of Gitaly Cluster. So that's really our top priority, making sure the feature is really reliable and stable. The other area is, I guess, improving the characteristics of the feature itself. And so the first feature that we've been working on and hopefully we'll ship a beta version of in 13.2 is a first version of strong consistency. So that means when you push a change or make a change to a repository, that's replicated in multiple places. We've got a very rough development version that we're testing and experimenting with that works for certain write operations and requires all nodes to agree completely. So consensus. That's a bit of a problem because if one node is having a problem, one Gitaly node becomes unresponsive, it could take down the whole cluster because no write transactions would then be permitted because consensus can't be reached. So we're looking on improving the reliability of that, changing the behavior a bit to make it easier to test and deploy on gitlab.com. And we need to document how to turn it on as a beta feature. So that's strong consistency. And the key improvements, which you'll see in this list, is working on the transaction hook, which improves coverage of which write operations will be covered by strong consistency. So this change here should cover all write operations. Currently, we only cover a subset of them in the development version. And so that's really critical. And then we also need to improve the voting strategy, as I mentioned, which is avoiding requiring consensus. So those are key improvements coming to strong consistency, and hopefully in combination with other improvements that we're working on, like the performance of frame-wise proxying, will make a stable enough version to call beta. In parallel to that, we've been working on redistribution. So if all the replicas are up to date, so my repository is in the same state on 3 different servers, why not share the load for read operations across all up-to-date servers? And so we'll be working on that. We've got a rough version of this, which we're still in the process of documenting and testing and improving, where it distributes the reads. It's behind a feature flag. And we've run into some performance problems with the number of connections being made to the database. So we need to add documentation around the use of PG Bouncer and improve the observability. And we think with these improvements, it should be more reliable, and hopefully it will be stable enough that we can call it beta and make it easy for you all to start testing and experimenting with this. So really, yeah, the number one priority is getting the baseline feature a little bit more reliable in certain edge cases, and then working on strong consistency and redistribution, which are 2 very significant and important improvements that a lot of customers are looking for in this cluster feature. And then finally, there's some administration areas that we're working on as well, particularly around detecting data loss and knowing the state of all the different replica nodes, which repositories are up to date. Currently, we use a replication queue to determine status, and we're looking at evaluating improvements on that front. So those are all the improvements to Gitaly cluster. Really excited to continue to see this feature move forward and improve release after release. The other area that we're beginning to work on is adding new ways for you to back up your repository data in self-hosted environments. So today there is a single script that you can run on the server. It's documented this backup task. Scroll down here. Got a screenshot of running it, I think. Oh, so much discussion. Yes, so there's this command GitLab backup, and you can pass in a bunch of arguments to say only backup repositories or include, exclude different things. And this is the documented way to do a backup, but it doesn't work for large GitLab instances with many gigabytes of repositories. It gets very slow. So it's not really feasible for most real world large GitLab instances to use the documented backup script for backup and restore of Git repository data. So the first improvement that we're working on as part of this is to add concurrency support. So at the moment, the backup process is serialized. We take a backup of one repository and then we move on to the next, and then the next, and then the next. This means that in a lot of cases, a highly provisioned and powerful server is underutilized. All the cores might not be used, all the memory might not be used. We really want to make the backup faster. And so we're working on adding concurrency support so that you can control the concurrency factor, how many backups repositories will be backed up in parallel per Gitaly node, or Gitaly shard, I should say. And so that's really the first point. And then from here, we're going to work on more improvements around making the process incremental. So if you've taken a backup recently, how can we only back up the things that have changed? Skip repositories that haven't changed in the last 6 hours. And that would, in some cases, dramatically reduce the amount of data that needs to be backed up for any given run. So even on GitLab.com, obviously there's a very large number of repositories. Only a very small number of those, like a couple of percentage points, change in a single 24-hour window. And so only those would need to be backed up relative to all the other data. So this is just the starting point. And if you've got any feedback, if you've struggled with backups on GitLab, would really love for you to reach out on this epic particularly. Let me know, and would love to hear your thoughts on what we're thinking about as we firm up our plans for future iterations, which I'll share in upcoming kickoff calls. So that's the second priority that we're just beginning to dip our toe in the water of. And finally, we're continuing to work on partial clone. And partial clone, there's a blog post from a few months ago on the GitLab blog about partial clone and how that helps with large files. Working with large files and really large repositories is something we're keen to improve support of in GitLab. And what we'll be working on in 13.2 is continuing to improve the reliability of this feature. In the last month or so, there's been a couple of regressions that have come through, particularly in Git itself, that broke the partial clone feature. And we'll be wanting to continue testing and verifying that those fixes are in place and it works as expected. We're also continuing to document more workflows, like once you've done a partial clone, how to undo that. And long term, we're still working on how we offload large files from the high performance storage that most parts of the repository should be stored on, and offload those large files onto more cost-effective storage mediums like object storage, and doing that transparently in the back end. So we're working on some ideas on that front, and our objective for 13.2 would be to continue to firm those up and start getting feedback from the broader Git community, because this would likely involve changes to Git itself. So those are our three priorities the biggest and most substantial priority, of course, is Gitaly cluster. And then we're spinning up the incremental repository backups. So that's what's in store for Gitaly in the 13.2 release of GitLab. And I look forward to hearing your feedback and seeing you in a month for the 13.3 kickoff. Have a great day. Bye.